Good morning, everybody. And it's a very exciting opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Batra, for putting climate first as the first session of the day. We have a very young crowd here, young law students. So I want to start with that how Dr. Bhasin, when he was talking about climate at the end of his keynote address, how much alive he is to this new challenge of climate resilience or climate emergency, that I reached out to him that you create a separate committee for environment and climate change. And he created it within us, within Society of Indian Law Firms. And that is just few months back. So that's the kind of challenge we are facing. We have a very, very exciting panel. We have a virtual guest, Mr. Varghese, welcome. And I hope you can hear me. We have Navneet, my very old friend, not much younger to me, but we have been working together. And I'm also very happy to have Tanvir, who gives us a very new dimension because he teaches in one of the most premium colleges of the country, and Mr. Satpathy from Saraf and Partners. What is mainstreaming here? So, because young lawyers are here who will be lawyers in few months' time, I'm going to say something very different. You hear it very carefully what all we say. And even when the panel ends, ask us questions. If you ask good relevant questions, at least in Trust Legal, I'll give you internship. I can only take advantage of my position, so I'm saying it very clearly. Internship, because we specialize on this issue and we understand this. ESG is a, let me just try and do a little bit of demystification. Environment was always something the courts were dealing with in last 20, 30 years. We had a forest bench, we had National Green Tribunal. There was a different way how environment was being handled. There was a pole position where infrastructure or the companies will come in blows before the courts. There'll be a particular public interest litigation group which will be raising voices that how infrastructure should be allowed. And there'll be people like Mr. Bahuguna, Mr. MC Mehta, or many so-called very careful people who took charge, who tried to save the forest, who tried to save the rivers, who tried to save the wildlife. And that was the climate in 1990s. We had a very face-off kind of position. Face-off ka matlab kya hota hai? Divided position. Then came the time in last 5 to 8 years where only one planet exists concept was there. There was a climate emergency. So what is the meaning of climate emergency? And then we'll come to ESG and SDG. So environment was always into a face-off position. Social was something which we completely missed. So if you are putting a transmission line and you don't know why people are taking illegal wires and taking out electricity without paying the bills for the electricity, that's the example I'm giving you how social is important. Or not be alive to gender equity, or not be sensitive to the boardrooms where how gender should be appreciated, and governance where government would be thinking development is important or environment is important, how to balance it. So that was the typical scenario. What has happened in last 5 to 8 years is something very dramatic. India voluntarily says that we'll reduce carbon emissions. We are the 10th fastest growing electric mobility market in the world. We have put non-conventional energy into our grid up to 35 to 40% in last 10 years. And just day before yesterday, a wildlife legislation has been passed in one of the houses of the parliament, Navneet, where we have enhanced the penalty for wildlife crimes substantially. We have proposed without anybody asking. And one more example how friction has gone and how consensus is the new word, that plastic slowly has moved out of your life, excessive packaging, after the plastic rules of 1st of July 2022. But no major litigations happened. So my panelist job would be today to actually talk about different aspects. I'll give them all floor one by one. I'll start with Navneet. And I'll say, you have seen that period. You are a proud alumni of Nalsar. You were teaching environmental law in OP Jindal and also in National Law School in Patna. You have also practiced in NGT. How it has changed, and these young minds who are sitting here, how do you demystify this new shift?
So just to clarify, I was teaching environmental law at NLU Delhi and OP Jindal, and I was teaching corporate law for a semester in Patna, because that's the part of the world where I come from. And like Mr. Mishra very rightly kind of gave you a background in terms of how the, the whole environment jurisprudence has evolved and everything. So I think we are living in times which are extremely critical, and we are living in times which will pretty much decide not the future of this country, but also humanity, the world, and all of that. And I think, because Mr. Bhasin also very rightly said that, climate change as such is more like an existential crisis. And so, which is why, I mean, we've arrived at the party quite late, because it's only now that we're talking about ESG, we're talking about, BRSR and reporting and all of those things. But this is something which has already happened in Europe. It's been there in the US for quite some time. And I think, and it's not something, one thing what we need to realize is, this is not something which is, it's like a new animal. It's a, something that's never existed. The idea is we've always had these compliance requirements under various statutory requirements. And it's just that you now have a new nomenclature which kind of requires companies to kind of report in a certain format before a certain regulator. So a lot of people, a lot of companies actually tend to think that this is more like a reporting burden of sorts, but that's not the reality. I mean, the idea simply is that there's a better way to be. It's more like a state of mind where you kind of, you become more responsible in terms of not just towards the environment, everything that's around you, your people, how you conduct yourself, in terms of your governance and everything. So that's of course there. Now, coming on to, so because I understand that in the audience we have a board of students, I think, see, all of us, we are all extremely ambitious people. We want to do what we want to do in our lives. But one thing which, irrespective of what you do, which profession you are a part of, one of the things you clearly cannot compromise on is the quality of your life. And I think this is one area of, I think one discipline, not just an area of law or practice, but one discipline which pretty much kind of decides that. So I think it's extremely important that irrespective of what we do, we are conscious about the way we conduct ourselves, the kind of choices we make in our lifestyles, the kind of, in our business practices. And I think that it's not very complicated. I think just being mindful of what you do and the kind of impact you create, whether as a business, in the legal profession, what we do, and Mr. Mishra, of course, has been kind of, one of the stalwarts of environmental practice in this country. And so you see, the idea simply is, as students also, you have to ensure that if you're talking about climate change, we all know what is happening at COP27. And I don't want to be sounding very pessimistic, but like Mr. Mishra said that, when I was a student studying for my 5-year law at Nalsar, I would always hear about the whole developing debate, NX1, NX2 countries. And even after I've been practicing for 15 years now, practicing environment and stuff, I'm still hearing the same debate. Where you're talking about funding, you're talking about technology transfer. So we've not really moved much. I mean, of course, every COP, every conference of parties, you say that, this is the outcome. But unfortunately, that's not really translated in terms of the impact that it should be creating. So I think that is something which we need to change. And one good example which Mr. Mishra gave, that, this whole, the kind of penalty, the kind of punishment, everything that is kind of, because see, environment for quite some time in this country was taken for granted. If you actually, say 10 years ago, if you actually happen to tell someone that, this is what it is, and they would simply say that, bakeling it, like, the kind is, let's, because there was more reason for them to, I mean, they had more incentive to actually pollute, because you clearly had fines, you clearly had punishments, but the teeth was clearly missing. So all I'm trying to convey is that, see, that the collective consciousness which Mr. Mishra was talking about, now that has clearly increased, that has improved. So now it's not something that you can kind of ignore. I mean, it's something which, irrespective of what you do, I mean, I was just hearing someone the other day talking about, that in their organization, in their whatever parking lot, they give preference to hybrid cars instead of diesel cars or whatever. Yeah. So I mean, that's just one example of what kind of behavioral changes you can actually bring about. But anyways, I'll stop at that, because I think there are other speakers also, and we'll
come back to you on that.
Thank you.
So I'll come to Saraf and Partners, Mr. Satpathy. What do you think? The topic which we had was that new challenges for the legal fraternity or the new opportunity for the legal fraternity?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mishra. Good afternoon, everyone. Snigdhaneel Satpathy from Saraf and Partners. Very, very relevant question, whether it's an opportunity or challenge. I think it's a mix of both. And let me give you my perspective on this. I primarily undertake M&As, and I'm a hardcore corporate commercial lawyers. But even in my practice area, we are increasingly seeing how ESG is playing a very important role. And I'll give you a few examples. Whenever these days you have a large private equity fund or a foreign fund which wants to invest into India, and typically these funds often invest in tech, but they also do a lot of investments in various other sectors, pharma, manufacturing. In these sectors, it is extremely critical that you comply with whatever environmental norms that are there. Because if you don't, then polluter pays principle can really hurt you. And one of the most interesting things that we are seeing is that you might be a company which is generating profits and revenue which is 10x, 20x of your operating costs. But you will never get a good valuation if your compliances, your environmental issues, your social issues, your governance are not in order. Because no private equity fund or no foreign investor would really want to put their money in a place so that tomorrow there could be an issue. If you really think about it, I don't know how many of you remember in 2015, there was the whole Volkswagen scandal where, there were allegations that they were, manipulating their results of how much actually their engines were polluting, which led to hundreds of millions of dollars of fines for them, Another example I can think of is, in 2014 or 15, we had done the merger of Ranbaxy and Sun Pharma. That's remains one of the largest pharmaceutical mergers in India. Now, at that point of time, Ranbaxy had a fine from the FDA in US for certain governance issues which were there in one of the products that they had manufactured and which they were selling in the US. So Daiichi, when they bought it, they were not aware of this issue. And even today, there are cases pending in the Supreme Court and the Delhi High Court on this entire matter where they are trying to take the Singh brothers on. So my limited point is that, when you look at environment, when you look at social, when you look at governance, Navneet very rightly mentioned, you really can't look at these issues in isolation anymore. They sort of permeate through your entire culture. And one thing that we must remember, and which is something which we are increasingly seeing happening even in India, is that we are moving from a jurisdiction where it was primarily prosecution-led to more of an activism-led jurisdiction, where you will have investor shareholders, minority shareholders raising issues about the company, where you'll have third parties intervening in how the companies are being run. And it's not just environment, governance issues play a massive, massive role. BharatPay is one example which we have all seen how, such a promising company is now sort of going through its entire issues. As far as law firms are also concerned, and so therefore that really presents a unique opportunity to us, where we can get involved and we can advise. But that also faces a challenge because, I do a lot of, interviews, when new students are joining PPO interviews, I go to various colleges. And increasingly, one of the questions that I get to hear is that, what is the gender ratio in a firm? What is the gender ratio in a management? And that's something I think we need to be careful of and we need to really place emphasis on. So that's definitely a challenge for us. Foreign law firms ask us before giving work that what is the gender ratio? So yes, it's a challenge, but it's a huge opportunity as well if it can be mastered.
Very well said. I'll come to Mr. Varghese now, and then we'll come to the academic interpretation of our debate. Mr. Varghese, Cyril Amarchand has put a lot of premium on ESG practice, and Cyril himself has even gone for the scholarships on climate, if I understand it correctly, in University of Oxford. You have picked it up. Now tell me, in International Bar Association conference this year, and this is for all of you, the young students, when 5 years back we used to go, I remember that there'll be 2 or 3 sessions on sustainability, ESG, or even environment or whatever. Today, there were 43 sessions out of total of 100 which had an environmental component. So it's going to be a big practice. First, be very clear for the young students. Mr. Varghese, where do you see the golden opportunity to save the planet and also make lots of money for the law firm?
thank you for that question, and thanks everyone. I want to just give you a heads up. I am joining from Kochi, and it's pouring here, so I hope you are not picking up the din around me. It's pretty noisy, but yeah. Let me get back to the question. ESG. I mean, you would already be feeling it. ESG is touching everything that we do. For the corporates, for the community, and therefore the law firms. And that's why I think we see so much of ESG in the political discourse, corporate discourse, the civil society discourse, and all professional discourses. And, as the speaker before said to me, this is of bigger opportunity than a challenge. And if you look at the entire financial transactions across the world, pretty much every large investor, companies like BlackRock has committed that every penny they're going to put into a company, there's going to be an ESG criteria around it. And by 2026, we are expecting that ESG-based, assets to grow to $33 trillion. So we are already seeing that, financial transactions having an ESG component in it. Now, if you look at India, look at a country like India, we have this 2070 net zero goal, and the estimated investment implications are upwards of $10 trillion, or like $200 billion have to be pumped into this economy to make that transition. And I think the lawyers will, lead that journey up front, in helping the nation get there. Of course, a lot of that money is going to come from outside. And that's where I think a lot of us are seeing the traction already. But ESG is not just that, right? ESG is a much larger, comprehensive, multifaceted concept. It's not even equivalent to a typical compliance. Compliance, you see a particular regulatory regime. What is today driving the market is more voluntary, market-based corporate commitment. Like if BlackRock is taking a commitment that I will do investment only based on certain ESG criteria, everything that they do, it'll percolate down. Now, there are governments taking action across the world. USSEC is, they have draft regulations requiring listed companies to mandatorily assess climate risk and disclose. Not only just a qualitative disclosure, they are requiring quantitative disclosure. That is already prevalent in the UK, and the RBI in India, just a month ago, they have they put out a discussion paper, essentially suggesting the same, that that's obviously for the banking system to look at their climate risk and report. And so the regulatory regime is catching up across the world, and we are going to see, at least in India, we see the same things moving in the same directions. So what today is probably actions based on voluntary commitments and general corporate advisory is going to become more and more compliance-oriented going forward, because these regulatory regimes are going to kick in.
Thank you.
There is a discussion about establishing a carbon market. So I think, when I joined Cyril, Amarchand, Mangaldas, among the young crowd, there's been so much of interest. People have walked into my cabin, people drop me emails, they want to part of this journey. And I think a lot of them just realize that. And they are very, very excited about this. They are very positive about this sector. They want to be part of this transitional journey.
Okay.
And I think it's a big opportunity.
Okay, Mr. Varghese, wonderfully put. Many thanks for this. We'll come back to you briefly again. before I go to the Ramjas College, and it's a full circle we are going to. So you are from law school, so you will appreciate. So one of the first ESG report, which I think a university has done, is OP Jindal University last year, and which I produced. We prepared that in partnership with Terry and Arthur the Little. So we checked up how much water the hostels are using, what is your community linkage where the university is, how many people are employed in your own university, how do you use water while the wash basin is on, in the wash basin, how you use your water if you're using your brush. Everything we computed in that. Energy, flora, fauna, number of trees, plants. So we realized that you start, like Gandhi said, that whatever you expect others to do, you do that action on your own. And this report became such a sensation. 14 chief ministers and governors released that report. I traveled with Professor Rajkumar, the founder of the university, to these places. What excitement. Now we are doing 5 reports parallelly. So I was just talking about the commercial part of the law practice before I go to the last speaker. It's going to be a huge, huge practice. How do you talk about the regulatory compliances? What is the gender issue? How the it's like a student, it can be done for a factory, for a premise. So for you teaching this entire aspect, what do you think of ESG in India?
Thank you so much, Sudhir Mishra, and thank you for Business World for inviting me for this very interesting discussion. Yeah, I mean, as we see that environment is taking up the society, and we are seeing that we are seeing that there's a huge crisis on the anvil, and how to cope up with that crisis. That's very important. Now, universities, organizations, and private organizations, all of them, they're trying to comply by the environmental laws which are coming up, which are being more stricter and stricter, and of course, you see that there's penalty also is increasing. So, what do we do about it? What are the organizations? How do they cope up with this? You know, for me, you know, ESG, of course, is the S part, the social part, perhaps. Is, as somebody said, that's missing.
Yeah, which we neglected till now also.
Yes,
so you can
yes.
speak
So
on.
I think social involves both the ethics, the politics, the power aspect, right? So I think it's very important, because the moment you think about governance, the moment you think about making policies about how to cope up with the challenges which the environment throws, and of course how you build up your own organization, then you need to tackle these issues. So what are the key challenges? You know, for me, the key challenges and concerns at the moment right now is that how do you manage diversity? You know, diversity. How do you manage inclusion? How do you manage access to the organizations? You know, how do you manage equity? You know, this is also very important concern. So these concerns are very, very important as far as the governance part in the ESG is concerned. Now, we are seeing that, you know, how to have you know, the externalities which are affecting organizations. Somebody right now said that, you know, that the pollution, the polluters must pay. So who is the polluter? You know, that is the real question, that who is the polluter? For instance, you know, 90% of the greenhouse gases, you know, which are emitted in the supply chain process, right? So now, how do you manage that? I mean, in the process of supply chain, you have 90% of the, which is called, I think, scope 3 emissions. So how do you bring about the tax compliances on that, right? What are the, I mean, I'm seeing that the Tobin tax perhaps is not working well, and there are challenges with the Tobin tax also. So the fair compliance of the laws, perhaps, I think, would bring out more litigations. So as a teacher, you know, my concern is that how do you, you know, as a human being, how do you relate with the environment? How do you relate with the environment? You know, do you want to do mastery over the environment, or do you want to live in sync with the environment, which is sort of in harmony with the environment, or do you want to accept that as it is? So my concern is that, if you really want to have ESG, a proper ESG where you can sort of think about the solutions. I know it's very difficult to think about the solutions. We always have fetishization of solutions. We always think that we are great enough to give solutions. But if you think about the solutions, my perception is that we need to build a very harmonious relationship with the environment, and the organizations, law firms or private organizations, even academic environment also, academic institutions, Jindal that you talked about, must bring up the policies or govern in the way in which there is harmony with the environment and not mastery over the environment.
Okay, wonderfully said, very well put. We are absolutely, time is up, and I haven't already signaled that. So I'll just say in conclusion, especially to the young law students, that law is a huge career, as Dr. Bhasin said, and you will hear it throughout the day with many speakers coming here. Cyril is here, he will give you the perspective, how do you become a super general counsel? And there are many people who will speak. I would say just one thing, I'm a first generation lawyer, and I think most of us are here first generation lawyers, Navneet including. My one suggestion to you is keep your options open. Find one path and just take one thing and go all after, like Arjun went for the eye. That's the only option you have. This is what I did, and I'll tell you a very interesting thing. We were doing environmental law. For 15 years, I was only doing it. Later, we do everything from merger acquisition to private equity. It comes to you. So one specialization which Dr. Lalit Bhasin said, very rightly he said, and you have heard from us that how environment, social, governance, SDG, these have become your elephant in the room, which is like, you cannot avoid them any longer. So if that issue has become so important, a legal career can be made out of it. And that is what the focus should be for you. Do hard work in that area. Thank you. Thank you all the panelists for this wonderful time and wonderful session.